During a Roman triumph, it was customary for the Senate's current office holders to stand in honor of the triumphator as he rode past their podium on his way to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Yet during Caesar's triumph celebrating his victory over the sons of Pompeius Magnus in Hispania, the 45 BC praetors, aediles, consuls, and tribunes all came to their feet, except for one. Pontius Aquila was a tribune of the plebs for the 45 BC year. Because he had been a supporter of the Pompeians and had adamantly opposed the excessive honors continually heaped upon Caesar by a sycophantic Senate, Pontius Aquila refused to stand when Caesar's triumphal chariot passed by. Immediately noticing his lack of deference, Caesar drew his chariot to a stop. There, in front of the podium and the citizens of Rome, Caesar shouted, "Come Aquila, take back the republic from me." And for several days following his triumph, Caesar taunted Pontius Aquila mercilessly. Every decision or appointment to an office the dictator made, he qualified with the statement, "That is, if Tribune Aquila will allow me," even going so far as to send staff to Pontius Aquila to inquire if it was permissible for Caesar to make this promise or that. Although Caesar laughed the whole thing off as a joke, not all were amused. Those who opposed Caesar were paying very close attention to his actions and demeanor. Caesar, as another way to curry favor with the people, had invested huge sums of money into the rebuilding of the Forum Romanum. The Senate House and the Basilica Porcia had been burned to the ground 7 years earlier when the outraged plebs of the city had built a funeral pyre and ignited the remains of their patron, Publius Clodius Pulcher, on the premises. In addition to the new temple dedicated to Venus Genetrix and Cleopatra, Caesar began construction of a new Senate house, and continued construction on a new Basilica Julia, which he had begun around 54 BC to replace the old and crumbling Basilica Sempronia. With so much construction going on in the Forum Romanum, Caesar did much of his administrative work as dictator at the site so that he could simultaneously advise construction foremen throughout the process. On October 1 of the 45 BC year, Caesar vacated his office as consul without a colleague, and bestowed the remainder of his consular term on his favorites, Gaius Trebonius and Quintus Fabius Maximus, naming him as suffect consuls. The Senate, having already given Caesar the dictatorship for 10 years, the right to be consul for 5 years, and a 3-year term as censor, created even more honors and titles for Caesar, such as Pater Patriae, or Father of the Country. They declared him liberator for having freed Rome from Pompeian insurrection, and granted him the title Imperator in Perpetuum, or Commander of Rome's armies for life. Caesar was also granted the right to wear the kingly garb of the purple and gold-bordered toga picta, as well as a laurel wreath, on all festival days. The Senate even voted a statue be fashioned in Caesar's likeness and be erected on the rostra among the statues of Rome's first 7 kings, as well as the statue honoring the man responsible for ending the rule of the kings and launching the Republic. This man, whose name was Brutus, was the ancestor of Marcus Junius Brutus, the son of Caesar's mistress, who was currently serving as Caesar's proconsul of Cisalpine Gaul. When Gaius Trebonius and Quintus Fabius Maximus led a delegation of senators to inform Caesar of these new honors, they found him seated within the temple of Venus Genetrix and engrossed in conversation with his private secretary, Lucius Cornelius Balbus. As the delegation approached, Caesar did not even rise to greet them. When they announced their news to Caesar, he only laughed, joking to Balbus that the Senate needed to cut back on his honors rather than adding to them. Because he did not stand and show the proper respect due consuls and senators, Caesar offended their dignity, making the group of Roman officials feel their positions were insignificant in the eyes of the high and mighty Caesar. Caesar later issued an apology to the Senate, claiming he did not stand because he was suffering from a case of diarrhea, and did not want to humiliate himself by revealing his soiled toga. But not everyone accepted his apology. On the very last day of December, the consul, Quintus Fabius Maximus, died unexpectedly. When the news reached Caesar, he immediately ordered an election to nominate a suffect consul for the remainder of the year. Most of the Senate found this unnecessary, as the newly elected consuls for the 44 BC year, Marcus Antonius and Caesar himself, were due to take office the very next day. But Caesar insisted, and Gaius Caninius Rebilus was named suffect consul for the last day of the consular year. Rebilus was one of Caesar's legates during his conquest of Gaul. He was the man who laid siege to the stronghold of Usulodunum after the Battle of Alesia and capture of Vercingetorix. Once again, by ensuring one of his men became a consul, even if only for a few hours, Caesar further devalued the prestige of Rome's consulship while demonstrating it was now his to bequeath. Of Gaius Caninius Rebilus, Cicero wrote, while he was consul, there was no harm done, for he was so astonishingly vigilant that through the entirety of his consulship, he never closed his eyes. At the beginning of 44 BC, after Caesar and Marcus Antonius began their terms as consular colleagues, the Senate conferred yet another blessing upon Caesar. His dictatorship, which had been granted for a period of 10 years, was extended indefinitely. Caesar was now considered dictator in perpetuum. As the man who would now control the Senate for the remainder of his life, Caesar ordered a special chair, gilded in gold. Without a proper house in which they might meet, the Senate had spent the last 7 years meeting in various temples and curia throughout the city. Caesar's new golden chair now had to be carried to each location where the Senate met, and be placed between the chairs of the consuls. Not long after Caesar's gilded chair was installed in the Senate, 2 tribunes of the plebs, Gaius Appidius Merillus and Lucius Caesicius Flavus, noticed something curious on the statue of Caesar which had been erected on the rostra. Twinkling on Caesar's head in the early morning light flashed the sparkle of a diadem. The diadem, a headband made from luxurious material and decked with a large gemstone, was worn in place of a crown by most of the Eastern monarchs from kingdoms like Armenia, Pontus, Parthia, and even Egypt. The tribunes of the plebs removed the diadem. On January 26, as Caesar came riding on horseback into the city, many within the crowd started shouting the word Rex. Rex was the family name of Caesar's grandmother, Marcia, who was the daughter of Quintus Marcius Rex. But Rex was also the Latin title for king. Caesar made humor of it, a pun quipping, "Non sum Rex," said Caesar, which meant not Rex, but Caesar, as if they had accidentally identified him by his mother's family name. But the tribunes Merellus and Flavus, believing the diadem placed on Caesar's statue was no accident, and suspicious these were agents provocateurs planted in the crowd by Caesar to gauge the public's reception to the idea of his becoming king, ordered the arrest of those shouting Rex. In response, Caesar accused Merillus and Flavus of placing the diadem on his statue themselves, in order to manufacture opposition to his rule. Caesar ordered their arrest, stripping them of their offices and exiling them from Rome. However, because the tribunes of the plebs represented the people, Caesar's action cost him the trust of some of Rome's citizens. In mid-February, Caesar oversaw the Lupercalia. The Lupercalia was a fertility festival dating back to Rome's founding in which 2 young men, one from House Quinctii and one from the Fabii house, were chosen as magistas, or priests of the festival. Sacrificing specific animals within the sacred cave alleged to be the original home of Rome's founders, Romulus and Remus, the magistas stripped down to loincloths made from the skins of the animals they had just sacrificed. With blood and milk from the animals smeared across their foreheads, and tiny whips called februa tied to their fingers and wrists, the 2 Lupercalia priests ran counterclockwise circles around Palatine Hill, where they slashed at women who threw themselves in their paths. To receive a lash from one of the Lupercalia magistas was considered a fertility blessing, so women thronged the streets in the hope of being bloodied, believing they might then easily conceive in that year. In 44 BC, in honor of Julius Caesar, a third house, that of the Julii, was added to the magistas of the Lupercalia. Because he had Julian blood through his mother Julia, the consul, Marcus Antonius was chosen to be the magister of House Julii. For the first time since the official founding of Rome, 710 years earlier, 3 magistas ran the Lupercalia course around Palatine Hill. As Antonius ran one of his passes around the Palatine, he approached the podium where Caesar sat overseeing the fun, dressed in his toga picta and wearing his laurel wreath in celebration of the festival day. Antonius then produced a diadem and placed it on Caesar's head saying, "The people give this to you through me." The crowd fell silent. Caesar removed the diadem to the erupting applause of the people. Once more, Antony placed the diadem on Caesar's head, and once more, the crowd grew quiet. This time Caesar removed the diadem and ordered it taken to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, who alone was king of the Romans. Once again, the crowd exploded into rapturous applause, but Caesar's enemies saw something quite different. Those who opposed Caesar's complete domination of Roman politics saw in Caesar's gilded chair a throne. In his arrest and exile of the tribunes of the plebs, they observed the forced removal of political opposition. And in the festival of the Lupercalia, Caesar's enemies saw a staged performance designed to test just how ready the Roman people might be to accept Caesar as king. Even Cicero questioned where the diadem originated, as there was only one Eastern monarch in Rome at the time, and she was the same woman who could now be seen standing alongside the goddess Venus, the divinity claimed by the Julii. For Caesar's enemies, he had gone too far. Cleopatra, a queen, stood in a Roman temple. Rome now used an Egyptian calendar. As dictator in perpetuum, Caesar possessed lifelong immunity from prosecution. And Caesar no longer disguised his desire to be king of Rome. The plot to kill Caesar, which Gaius Trebonius had unsuccessfully used to tempt Marcus Antonius, had fallen apart. But another plot to assassinate Caesar was just unfolding. This ends the 6th series. Please join us for Series 7, where we will follow the deification of Julius Caesar, and its subsequent consequences on his supporters. Thank you for watching.